Well, on behalf of the Air Force Association, good morning and welcome back to this discussion of warfighter training and readiness. We've talked a lot about technology and equipping the future fight. Now we're turning our attention to the most important weapon system in the arsenal, people. Training and preparing warfighters to be masters of the warfighting domain is absolutely pivotal. If we're going to take America's best and brightest and put them directly into harm's way, then we need to be absolutely sure we're investing in the right resources to make them successful. That's especially important today as we prepare to engage peer threats in the contested realms of air, space, and cyber. I'm delighted to be joined by Lieutenant General Brad Webb, Commander, Air Education and Training Command. And joining him is Brigadier General Sean Bratton, Commander of the newly formed Space Training and Readiness Command, STARCOM. Sirs, I appreciate it and thank you for being with us today. So I'd like to begin with your initial thoughts and perspectives on your command's role in events playing out on the global stage. In keeping with our theme, air and space power, indispensable to deter, fight, and win, some are perhaps wondering why America has an Air Force and perhaps a Space Force. Sir, thoughts? General Webb.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks for having us here to kind of be the closeout session before we get on to the other festivities. Let me just say, and I will answer the question, but I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge right off the bat today, 20th anniversary of Operation Anaconda. The last Medal of Honor recipient, John Chapman, Chappie, gave his life in defense up on that mountain. It's germane, obviously, because it's 20 years ago, and for some of us in the room, I can't believe it's been 20 years. But the other thing is, it's germane to the topic we're going to talk about, which is airmen and guardians, and the importance of that weapon system. So the question, why does America have an Air Force? If you listen to General Brown's comments yesterday, and actually this has been an ongoing discussion that we've been grappling with in the senior leaders of the Air Force, and I really like where we've landed. If you ask a soldier, why do we have an Army? He'd say it's to fight and win our nation's wars. If you ask a sailor, it's to project power abroad and protect sea lines of communication. And in the Air Force, sometimes we roll back into the 5 core missions of the Air Force: air superiority, rapid global mobility, et cetera. But why do we have an Air Force? And General Brown was loud and clear on it yesterday. It's defend the homeland, project our power abroad, support the joint force. And he's added this corollary, which I love, and you would have heard it yesterday, all done on the bedrock of our foundations. And our foundations for the Air Force are readiness, infrastructure, and people. Obviously in the Air Force, airmen, Space Force guardians. And I think that's really, really important. And that right there encapsulates, and how you do that, of course, becomes the core missions inside the Air Force. But right there, I think, is very germane, and General Brown was really sharp on articulating that yesterday.
Thank you, sir. Governor, over to you for STARCOM.
Hey, thanks. Thanks. It's an honor to be up here. And for the folks in the room, there's a pretty good crowd here for the last session at the end of the hallway on the day 2. So way to get your money's worth out of AFA. Thanks for coming out to hear us. I'll tell you, on the Space Force side, STARCOM is the newest of the new thing, right? If the Space Force, I think General Brown or General Raymond said, is a toddler running around, we're in our infancy for sure on the STARCOM side, and couldn't do it without our partners in AETC, among other places across the Air Force. So I see a lot of AETC patches out here. Thanks to you guys for helping us figure this out. The STARCOM mission is pretty straightforward: prepare every guardian for competition and conflict. And we see a great example of that going on in the world right now. What we ask ourselves every day is, what are we doing inside of Star Command to ensure those Guardians are ready to go when the combatant commanders need them. Whether it's basic training as we work through the transition, OTS, or all the way up to weapons school and advanced training activities, we owe the force, operational force, just the best training we can, so they're ready when called upon, whether it's in EUCOM, INDOPACOM, CENTCOM, or in the Space AOR in support of U.S. Space Command. So that's on our mind. Chief's here with me. We think about it, and how do we develop those activities to train Guardians to be ready for competition and conflict is what we're working through. And like I said, can't do that without our partners in AATC. So with that, happy to have discussion.
No, thank you, sir. So let's go. General Webb, I have a feeling you've been asked this question quite often from the top echelons of Department of Defense all the way out in the field. So from accession to combat readiness, how well do you now feel you prepare airmen to support a COCOM mission?
How do I feel about how we're preparing airmen?
How will you prepare them?
How will we prepare them?
How well?
Okay. It's will and well.
You get both.
Well, the other thing that you will have heard that I think is consistent with the themes, you heard it from the Secretary yesterday, and also the Chief. And you know, while the statement may be agile combat employment or multi-capable airmen, this is about an agile mindset. And you know, General Brown in his comments was actually remarking on, I guess, for instance, of someone that was building a checklist to check off the blocks to become an agile combat employment airman or something like that. And then he said, no, throw that away. This is about a mindset. Now, I mean, we could argue on the margins of whether capabilities need to be documented or not, but this is more about the mindset, a mindset that has understanding of mission type orders, mission command, being comfortable with being uncomfortable is really how I like to articulate it. And that's a goal, of course, but it's a mindset. And so uncertainty is going to be the coin of the realm in these future fights. And without developing into a long lecture, the bottom line is, culturally in the Air Force, we like to talk about weapon systems. That is culturally what we are. But the asymmetric advantage in this great power competition, when we talk about China, we talk about Russia, is, in my case, the airmen. I think, I won't speak for Sean, but it's kind of the same case with Guardians and the Space Force. This is the asymmetric advantage. And part of that is getting outside the box and allowing our airmen to be all that they can be. And I have any number of examples where I feel very confident that within the United States Air Force, we're well on that path.
General Bratton, you probably get asked the question a little differently, and that is, obviously with STARCOM, being less than a year old and growing. To begin with, I imagine most people ask you, can you describe STARCOM for us?
Yeah, sure. No, thanks. We stood up just last August 23rd last year, and hit our 6-month birthday a couple weeks ago. So it's been nonstop build, but the foundation of it existed in AETC, in Air Combat Command, in the squadrons that transferred over from the Air Force into STARCOM, AFOTech as well. So the broad mission of STARCOM is training and education, just like AETC, so the AU, inclusive of the LeMay Center, so we do doctrine as well in STARCOM, similar to AETC, but we also pick up a little bit of the Warfare Center activities. And so the weapons school, the 328th out there making weapons officers falls under STARCOM. The space flag, red flag-like activities that you see across the Air Force, what I think of as advanced training, although probably not exactly the right label, but that falls under us, as well as the AFOTech mission. So, General Sears and the AFOTech team down there at Kirtland doing all the operational tests, we take that on as well. And tying all that together, especially the training and test missions, is really the range. And so range and aggressor units that came over from Air Combat Command, and that what we're building out to be able to do training and tests for orbital warfare, which is really the growth area as we respond to the adversary, is the hard work ahead of us. We're leveraging everything the AETC's done. We pull Guardians from Keesler, Goodfellow, and the Vandenberg unit that's actually part of the Space Force. as well as that fundamental training done at OTS and BMT and ATC. I mean, those are our partners, but the mission there is a little bit bigger in a sense of there's more things, but a lot smaller in a sense of the scale that the Air Force has to generate and train to. You know, the size of the Space Force lets us do things at a much smaller scale.
If I stick with you, General Braden, so how's your roadmap coming along? How well?
Yeah, pretty well. I mean, we're certainly in a build phase, so it's everything from, you know, a lot of facilities, a lot of civilian hiring going on. The unit that came over, you know, we're through kind of the paperwork thrash of OCRs and all that. A lot of basing activities ahead of us, so there's sort of the bureaucracy that's demanded of any new organization occupies a lot of our time, but at the Delta and squadron level, we're really getting after what are the advanced training requirements. And so, for example, you know, orbital warfare, the adversary's got a lot of capability on orbit today, and they continue to demonstrate that. Direct descent ASATs, rendezvous and proximity operations. We don't live, or historically we haven't trained live against those things. We've done some sim activities, but we're really starting to think through Guardians in training before they show up at their operational squadron really need to have a couple of those sorties under their belt for what do you do when an adversary spacecraft approaches you on orbit? What does hostile intent look like? What's a hostile act in space? There's a lot of policy that goes to that, but in the training environment, that just the basic TTPs for warfighting, we got to figure those out. We got to figure them out right now. And so we're after that in the simulated environment, and I think we're going to see some of that training move to the live environment.
So between both of you, starting with you, General Webb, what are kind of some of the similarities and perhaps differences now that you see both commands formed up?
Yeah, so obviously some very similar functions, and Sean's kind of articulated some of the differences with Space Force and STARCOM. The charge that General Goldfein and then General Brown gave to me, and is, you know, obviously I got intent from General Raymond as well, is still playing out. And so there's some areas, there's a lot for us that STARCOM is biting off and trying to really form from the ground up. We in AETC want to be in a position where we can be value added and take those things that maybe aren't first order pieces that Space Force wants to address, but that they'll address or not down the road. They can make that, they can have the decision space to take that on later. For instance, recruiting. Recruiting service AETC is doing the recruiting service function for Space Force for the time being, and we'll see down the road where Space Force wants to go with that. And you know, maybe it's a little known fact that when Air Force stood up back in 1947, the Army recruited for the Air Force for about the first 5 to 7 years before we stood up. So we want to be in a position to do that with space, and frankly, any other of the areas that Space Force would like us to take on so they can get after their first order pieces. One other difference is, of course, is we have the 59th Medical Wing in AETC. They're stationed there at Lackland alongside BMT. I mention that only because it's not an only. Through the last 2 years of the pandemic, that wing was game-changing in our ability to fight through. That's a whole other story that I won't necessarily go into. But there's a little bit of nuances on the side that are different. The wheelhouse or the center of gravity is kind of similar, but there's some little bit of differences there.
General Bratton, but it's going to be the same questions, differences, similarities, but let's start with the fact that the U.S. Space Force is a digital service.
So we say that a lot. We're still learning what it means, I think, in many ways. We look to our partners in AETC, and they're stepping out on this, I think, as much as the Space Force is, with leveraging technology and digital aspects into the training environment. And so, you know, Chief and I were down at the 37th Training Wing, seeing the BMT Enterprise last week. A lot of discussion going on about AETC's plan to introduce that. And I think we'll benefit. Again, a little bit it goes back to the scale. There's some things that AETC is able to do just because the scale is so large that we'll be able to just leverage and ride on their coattails a little bit. Conversely, there's some things that we'll be able to do because we're really small that we can act as a pilot program for AETC to maybe watch and see how that goes. we're all up on the wearables right now for PT and trying to think through what that means for holistic health. I think that might be an area where the Air Force will watch us closely. Conversely, we had a lot of talk about technology and BMT, introduction of iPads, where AETC is going, and where we want to go and leverage that as well. So the partnership will stay close, I think, for a long time. Certainly places like Keesler and Goodfellow, across the sort of second Air Force enterprise, we have tight partnerships, and we're not in a rush to kind of separate and do our own thing. I think there's places where we will, for sure, but that'll come in time, and we'll do it smartly, both for the realities of cost, and then just there's no need to rush into something when there's nothing that's broken right now. There's things we want to do, absolutely, but I think we'll stay pretty tightly coupled for a few years.
Thank you. General Webb, so you're dealing with the full spectrum, and not just from entry to the combat readiness, but rather from culture to really doctrine. So what does it really take to be an airman?
Yeah, it's really back to my, I guess, second point that I made with you, and I just like to summarize that as being comfortable with uncertainty. This is about the airman that has an agile mindset. As a case in point, and I don't know if I'm skipping ahead on some of the questions, but it's germane. All of the Air Force was involved, really deeply with the Afghan evacuee situation a few months ago, and AETC was as well. And in fact, one of the bases that was identified to be one of the landing spots was a Holloman Air Force Base. And in fact, the general, the National Guard General, Gabrielli, was assigned out there in conjunction with the 49th Wing. Anyway, Chief Thompson and I went out to visit them early in the days, and I would share two instances with you. Both of them female first lieutenants, by the way. We're on the ground. We happened to be there when one of the evacuee planes landed from overseas there at Holloman, and got to watch this process. There was a female lieutenant, actually not from AETC. She was from Seymour Johnson. Her name was, at the time, she may be a captain now, First Lieutenant Whitney Longenecker. She was a personnelist assigned there at Seymour Johnson. And she's running around just organizing chaos, frankly, of people that are coming off the plane, what lines they're going to get into, where they're going to go for their various in-processing. And I'm looking at her and I'm going, hey, LT, have you ever deployed before? And she said, oh, no, sir. This is my first deployment. I mean, it kind of is, it looks like a deployment, in the sense of the chaos, as there's cranes literally building the tent city as we talk, and scads of kids running around kicking soccer balls. I mean, it was chaotic. And she's organizing this thing, and she's taken to it. And this is what I'm talking about. Is there a process for what you're setting up? No, sir. I just understand what needs to get done, and we're doing the best with. We'll try it. If this doesn't work, we'll try something else. That's precisely what we're talking about. The other one was a first lieutenant. Now she is a captain, Saleha Jabin. She is the DOD's only female imam in the Department of Defense. And I mean, we were there probably less than 2 weeks into this thing, and every one of the Afghan refugees oriented directly with her, and especially the women that were and the children that were coming off of the planes there from Afghanistan. And she became, I would say, from General Gabrielli's perspective, she had the first seat with him on everything. And in fact, she was from Shepherd, belonged to my formation. We started looking to, hey, she needs to redeploy for some other duties. And General Gabrielli said, we got to have her. And she stayed for the entire duration of this piece. And she was kind of a little bit maybe, she had taken more than just a narrow path of what maybe a chaplain is articulated for, but it was very important. And she could see what is the right thing to do. We need to be engaged here. These are lieutenants. And this is that mindset that General Brown keeps hearkening back to. And there's some other aspects in there too, culturally and diversity aspects that are very important. But at the end of the day, what do we need from our airmen? It's being comfortable with being comfortable with being uncomfortable, being comfortable with uncertainty. There's two lieutenants for you that show me we got this.
Sir, I think what you're almost describing is almost a new ethos of an airman, agile airman, and we're going to touch on agile guardian. Just on the previous panel, the Air Force Reserve Deputy, Major General John Healy, described the new agile airman loadmaster, delivering not only cargo but also babies, and in real time, everything going on. So let's talk about that ethos of a guardian, because this is important, General Bratton, and that is, how does STARCOM at the leading edge begin to mold that ethos through your training pipeline?
I'll tell you, we spent a lot of time talking about this, and the foundations of the Space Force are in the Air Force. An airman for 35 years, prior enlisted. I walked the parade field at Lackland and then through OTS, and so, that certainly informs our thinking. Same is true for the chief. That same background, went through Goodfellow as a 1N. But we're bringing in now the counterparts from the Army and Navy. So the inter-service transfers, about 1,000 of them, including the civilians coming across this year, that'll bring some different perspectives for us. There's been incredible space capability in the Army all along, and a lot of those folks are coming over. And so that will, I think over time, it will lead us to diverge from the Air Force. Certainly, there's a challenge that we're working through on how do you, really on the training side, how do you equip someone to operate in the space domain when they will never go to the space domain? The flyers in the Air Force look out the window, they see the air domain all around them. We can all stand on the ground and look up and see the aircraft. We can't do that in the space domain. And so we have to present a training environment that enables guardians to visualize, to understand, the physics of the space domain and how movement and maneuver there is so very different than movement and maneuver on the sea, on land, in the air. I think conveying those in the training environment, providing a range that lets them experiment and test and train and develop tactics will be key for us. But that sort of visualization, understanding at the cognitive level of how to operate in a place that you will never go, unless you're fortunate enough to hitch a ride with SpaceX if you got the money, or take the astronaut route through NASA, which the Air Force has historically done. But that's just a handful of folks who are ever going to actually get there. So it's a big challenge. We're thinking through it, how to best present that, and then build that into the culture and identity of all Guardians.
Go ahead, sir.
Doug, I'd like to circle back just a little bit on this concept of the airmen we need going forward. In the Air Force, what's gotten traction in the last couple of years is the term developing the airmen we need, DAWN. And fundamental to that, these we run the risk of kind of becoming buzzword bingo sometimes with our words. And what does that really mean when we talk about certain phrases? And one of them is foundational, kind of stuff. And another one is competencies. And of course, in AETC, there's this phraseology of foundational competencies that become really important when we talk about the airmen we need going forward. One of the advances that we've done with General Brown is really slap the table on what we're calling, what are these competencies? And they really bucketize. It's a laundry list. It's 24 terms. I won't go through that. But they're bucketized very well, I think. When we talk about developing the airmen we need, we're talking about development of yourself, development of others, development of ideas, and development of the organization. And if you kind of think about it in that terms, it really kind of adds to this agile mindset that I'm talking about, this mission, multi-capable airman. But it's in those buckets of development that's really going to be key with AETC going forward.
It's really true. The young Guardian and the young airmen are really the innovators. So we just got to equip them that way and train them to think that way even more, even though it comes naturally for them. So on that note, I'd like to get into your command mindset, especially as you see your commands setting the foundation for developing leaders of tomorrow, but at the same time you're developing readiness for today. So really, what's changing from that perspective as you foundationally?
Well, the developmental competencies or the foundational competencies with development is really ground zero for us. Inside the AETC vision is developing exceptional airmen of character, the foundation of our United States Air Force. It's right there in the phraseology. So foundationally, if you were to ask me, is foundation, what's your role in AETC with respect to building that foundation? It's right there. And so all of those categories of development, from self to others to organization to ideas, are fundamental with us going forward.
General Brad.
Yeah, I think we're trying to think through for the Guardians coming in. I mean, they're very demanding and want access to just both the best training, which we owe them, but also a variety. They're nervous. We in the Space Force, to some extent, we put people into what we call a space power discipline, so like electronic warfare, orbital warfare, space battle management. When I talk to the lieutenants, the young Guardians, they're concerned about being tracked into that for an entire career. Now, in my career in the Air Force, I got to do all sorts of things. I cross-trained. I was an old 33S, so 17, and I became a 13S space operator. I was prior enlisted, radar maintenance. So I had a ton of variety in my Air Force career, and I went back to training over and over as needed to support those decisions, both that the service needed from me and that I got to make. Going to weapons school, going to PME in residence. We're thinking through something that the Air Force does on a large scale. How can we do that on a smaller scale and allow a lot of cross-training opportunities? And we have so few AFSCs today. I think it lets us be a little more nimble there. And then these advanced training opportunities, things like test pilot school, weapons school, super coders, which is a Space Force kind of advanced coding school, SAS. I mean, these opportunities. So when you build a career, from the service point of view, I'm constantly making a better operator, more lethal in the space domain, but also a lot of choice for the Guardian that we think may positively affect retention, reasons to stay because you're constantly given opportunities to cross-train, but also maintains a high level of interest. There's always another thing to learn, another opportunity, and that's true in PME, in training, in advanced training activities. And so I think we're small enough we can build the construct. I don't think there's anything new there. Like I said, this is exactly my career that I had in the Air Force, and the chief has similar experiences where there's always another thing to learn. And so we're working through that now. There's a lot of just kind of the numbers on the personnel side of, someone's still got to be on console up at Thule, manning the radar. And so we got to do the operational mission, but then be able to pull them out for training as much as we can over and over and over.
Generals, for the audience, I think it's time for us to look into your Rolodex and see what's on your speed dial or your telephone, because you must be talking to other air and space commanders out in the field, perhaps even the combatant commanders. So who do you talk to help inform your command's direction?
On my side, I'd say it's principally the MAJCOM commanders. I wouldn't say that we don't talk to the COCOMs, but in a lot of ways, the MAJCOM commanders, depending on who we're talking about, are the component commanders themselves from an air perspective. There's all kinds of areas that we delve into from, which has kind of been one area which is kind of wheelhouse for AETC and has been for a number of years, is how do you modernize modern learning methods from kind of 1970s style to with technology today. That's an area. But the bottom line, and the one that I won't come off of in my realm, and which I think really resonates with our MAJCOM commanders, is quality. It's very easy to get into a discussion on production. I mean, this is a production engine at the end of the day in AETC. And it's very easy to get sucked into the, meet that number. And maybe it's my background, I don't know, and it may sound cliche-ish, but job one is still quality. So it's way more important to me, if I'm going to stand in front of the secretary or the chief and say, we didn't make a number, or we have a crappy product, I'd way rather be in the position of, we didn't make that number, but here's the feedback from the field. It's a quality product. And that for me is as cliche-ridden as it may sound, is job one.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're blessed to have a lot of help from the Air Force. And so the counterpart organization, for sure, General Webb, General Toulos, General Edmondson at 2nd Air Force give us a lot of help. General Sears and the AFO Tech team down at Kirtland, and then General Cunningham and the Warfare Center are kind of the counterpart organizations on the Air Force. So spent a lot of time talking to all three of them. The test center folks out of Edwards as well. We're talking to the other services too, though. So TRADOC, Army Futures, a little bit Army Recruiting Command to understand how do they do things. Chief's headed out to talk to the Coast Guard. Scale-wise, they're a little bit closer to us to understand how they do things, especially in the training pipeline and the kind of awarding of what we would call initial skills training or AFSC awarding schools, and see how they do those things so we can bring in some ideas from others in addition to our teammates on the Air Force side. So that for sure is the Rolodex. Lots of help from the operational side of the Space Force and SPOC with General Whiting, and of course, if you know General Burt, she is a force to be reckoned with and helps me every day with ideas and thoughts, and she's been working this training business a long time, so I get a lot of help from her specifically. So that's kind of the Rolodex of helpers. And then I'd say in the build out of the range, maybe our most significant activity is from scratch is the build out of we call it the National Space Test and Training Complex, the NISTIC, sort of like the knitter would be the equivalent out at Nellis. And as we think that through, and that is a lot of industry help coming in for that. And so we're working with industry on ideas. How do we think about this? What can we do live? What makes sense to do digital and simulation with our industry partners?
Let's take a step back now and talk about training, especially in an era of autonomy, artificial reality, and breakthrough technologies. It seems to me, at least, to be getting pretty complicated, especially after a recruit puts on a uniform and has just learned how to march. Are you training to a certain concept? And then I'm going to have a follow-up question to that. It's going to be more in the area of your thoughts about immersive experience or immersive training. Sir.
Yeah, so the good news on this is that while, us here on the stage are at best digital immigrants, the people that are joining our services are natives. And so a lot of this conceptually, we have to be paying attention to how this is being received and really being responsive to how airmen, in my case, that are entering the service today think and how they learn. And it is in a continuous fashion. And so these immersive technologies are definitely important. I think, for instance, Wi-Fi today in United States Air Force is a utility, just like electricity and running water are a utility. It's easy to say, it's expensive, so a little bit harder to do, but fundamentally, this is a necessary item, and it's very useful in continuing the process of being in a situation where you are a continual learner. Now, we have a number of programs inside AETC that have fundamentally reshaped how we teach and learn, like Pilot Training Next, which has grown into Pilot Training Transformation, and also on the technical side, Tech Training Transformation. So we see instances of where you can have AI and big data and virtual reality that are very helpful. Sometimes it's blended together. Sometimes it's in a mixed situation, and we're experimenting. But it's very helpful. And it's not just for technical things. Air University, for instance, has a course that's a massive hit with the Air Force called Leadership Development Course. And we use avatars to be able to teach leadership situations. And you may kind of be skeptical unless you've run through it, to where avatars that are responding and reacting to situations project a right mentality that you don't get when it's obvious that you're role-playing with live people. So there are a lot of really cutting-edge areas that we've seen a lot of fruit of the labor. So technology has been very beneficial, and we're going to continue to be on the vanguard of that for the Air Force.
I can't wait to hear your answer, General Bratton.
I'll tell you, I was at the Air Force Modeling Agency just 2 days ago, and they had a cockpit with VR goggles there, and they put me I was in a T6 in their pattern at Randolph, and crashed it, so, sorry about that. Yeah, it was, but pretty incredible capability. I mean, to put that on, see all the building, there's ATC headquarters that we were just in a couple weeks ago. That it goes right back to the space domain where Guardians will, never go into the domain. That is the way to access it for sure. Now, how do we think about that, and what makes it, not a gimmick and actual hitting training objectives and value added in training is the important piece to work through, because, it'll be cool to put VR goggles on and be in the space domain, make it dark and cold for them and work through that. But what is the training objective we're getting after? How does that lead to development of tactics, techniques, and procedures? I think we got to really think that through before we just go all in on that. But absolutely the future, I think, for space training.
Well, we got about 4 minutes remaining, and I'd really like to bring this all together now, but more in a real world perspective. So really, I'm sure you both are keenly evaluating both training and readiness impact as a result of the most recent withdrawal of forces from Afghanistan and as Russia's war against Ukraine intensifies. That's serious business for somebody who's beginning their service. So, essentially, how do you now grasp that diversity of thinking that's out there in your command as a result of events going on now?
Yeah, there's a lot. I'll try to keep this concise because the current events of the last few months, whether it's the Afghan situation with evacuees or ongoing missions now, really drive home for me the importance of the human domain, the airman, the guardian. And so I'm not joking when I say the asymmetric advantage is how we as Americans and we in the Air Force, the Department of the Air Force, grow our airmen and guardians. There are allies that look at the United States of America and go, professionalized NCO Corps is the difference in what we got. Because we have allies that have officers and conscripts and nothing in between. And the fundamental difference they see is the professionalized NCO Corps. I would add that it's the professionalized NCO Corps and the mid-career officers that are the fundamental game changers. And you have to look no further than current events to recognize that the human domain, people, make a fundamental difference. Okay? I don't have to get into specifics. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Leadership still matters. Being well led is very, very important. This is why I loved being in AETC, because it's about, at the end of the day, the people, the airmen and the guardians. And this is the asymmetric advantage.
Governor, final word, please.
Yeah, sir, thanks. I'll tell you that the Air Force has prepared me over and over again for all the challenges throughout my career. From time in Baghdad as a space operator with 50,000 Army folks around me, I was well prepared for all those things because of the training, education, PME, advanced training that I'd received, and felt comfortable that I could contribute to the fight. We owe that to all of our guardians, that when they come into conflict in the space domain, when they're up against an adversary, whether in low Earth orbit or out at geosynchronous, that they're prepared for that. Those first 10 sorties are under their belt, that they've got the education and training that they need. And this move to orbital warfare, to threats on orbit that is very different than what I grew up with as a space operator. We have to up our game a little bit on the space side to make sure that they're not in a position where they're facing an adversary and don't feel that they're ready for it. And so I think there's things that we're doing right now, there's things that were started before the Space Force that we're going to accelerate on, especially in the advanced training, the on-orbit activity. But I think laying that foundation and then reinforcing it throughout a career is what we're all about. And we're getting after it every day. We're getting after it, quite frankly, with a lot of help from the teammates in AETC and other places. So thanks to y'all. Thanks for the time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, General Webb, General Bratton, boy, what an insightful panel. All I felt was one team, one fight. So thank you on that, on my behalf and on behalf of the Air Force Association. Just so everybody knows, in lieu of speaker gifts, the Air Force Association made a donation to allow additional Guardians and Airmen to attend last night's barbecue. So thank you. Our final Air Force Association session, the awards ceremony and Spark Take event, which you do not wish to miss, is taking place at 11:20 in the big ballroom, the Gatlin Room. So come join us. And again, big round of applause for our two leaders up front.